Today we're talking about the element of art called space. And so there's lots of different ways that we can talk about space and art. Space can refer to the area in which the artist is using when they create a work of art. So we might talk about the space on the canvas itself or the space in the museum where their artwork or sculpture might occupy. But we can also talk about how they use the area within that space to create positive spaces, negative spaces, to create foregrounds and middle grounds and backgrounds and focal points and horizon lines, all of these types of things. So let's take a look at but what these things mean. What is positive space? Well, positive space refers to that main focus of the art. Sometimes it's often in the foreground, it's closest to us in that space, if you will. We talk about negative spaces very often, that area around that focal point, that main positive space that we're looking at. Sometimes we call it the background, but generally it's that foreground that we see where we have that positive space going on and where the main thing that we're looking at or that focal point is located. That horizon line refers to sort of where the sky meets the ground way off in the distance. Oh, wait, want to look at this little image down here.
Artists use space in art of all kinds. From sculptures to paintings, space really shines. Positive space is a good place to start. It's the foreground, or the main focus, of art. The focal points here are the grass and the tree. In the foreground, they're closer than the mountain you see. Negative space is usually found surrounding the focus in the background. Look at this painting and give it a try. What takes up the background? What catches your eye? Sometimes artists play tricks with space. Are these lines moving or standing in place? It might make you dizzy and cause some confusion, but these lines are drawn to create an illusion. You can use space to create perspective. What techniques can you spot, young art detective? Closer objects are larger in scale, and those in the background are small, like this sail. This hallway looks like it stretches far back, but really it doesn't. It's actually flat. Depth is created where vanishing lines meet, at a vanishing point to create artwork that's deep. Many techniques create space in art, like overlapping or shading to set it apart. So what are you waiting for? Give it a try. Use space in your artwork. You just might be surprised.
And this Make Day this week, we're going to look at how you can use space to create um, perspective. And we're going to create what we call single point perspective drawings this week. So today or this week, we're talking about how space is used by artists. We're going to look at how we use that vocabulary correctly. We're going to look at how artists use patience. They identify the steps they're going to need, and they're going to work on their craftsmanship as they practice their working of art. Um, you're going to make the use of those principles and elements of art, and we're going to talk about those steps that you need to complete. Particularly this week, as we look at single point perspective, it's one of those where you kind of have to follow those directions a little more rigorously than normal to get yours to look right. We're going to skip this. Okay. So understanding what negative space means. So sometimes we talk about where positive space is where there is something, and negative space is where there isn't something. That's one way to look at it and boil it down. And so when we look at this work here, What we really see is these positive shapes, these positive spaces being created by these dark shapes. We see the space that's left around them becomes this white sort of negative space. It kind of gets pushed into the background. Same thing here. We have a positive shape, these positive spaces, and then we have all of these negative, all this big negative shape and negative spaces in between those positive spaces. One of the things we're going to focus on our make day is the vanishing lines. Vanishing lines are often used to create depth, and depth is when things look like they're three dimensional or go back into space. And when we talk about perspective, it's the idea that as things go back further in space, they appear to look smaller to us. Think about trees maybe in your front yard. If you see a tree in your front yard, it's going to look really huge. But if you see a tree far away, it might be very tall, but you can hold your fingers up and it looks like it's only maybe an inch or so tall. And so it appears to go back into space and get smaller using what we call perspective. All of these things kind of go back into space to a single point way off in the distance where things get so far away they appear to vanish. We call that the vanishing point. So if we look at this image here, what they're showing us with those little lines, those perspective lines, is that sidewalk, it's not really shaped like a triangle. In real life, that sidewalk would be a big rectangle, just like the ones that you walk on every day. But because it's going back into space, it looks like it gets very narrow at the top. And where those 2 points would meet, those two lines would meet somewhere right off in the distance, kind of where that blue line is, but kind of just above where those two lines are. Those they would meet there. That's where the vanishing point would be located. Some artists like to make artworks that look just like they see things. And so, to understand that, how to create that same sort of space, they have to create tricks of the eye. And some of those tricks include that single point and 2 point perspective. The idea, again, that things that go further away from us look like they get smaller. They might use something we call aerial perspective, where it appears that the atmosphere itself between us and those distant objects makes them less saturated in color and that sort of thing, and they become faded away as they get further away. They are the unit stops to look at this artist named Delaney, who um, yeah, was part of this Orphism movement, and Robert Delaney is going to be your attendance question answer of the day, and he was a French painter born in 1885, Paris, France. Part of this Orphism movement, which had to encourage, or which encouraged artists to use these bright abstract colors and abstract subjects. It focused on bright colors and these abstractions. In 1910, he married an artist named Sonia. They collaborated on these big, colorful works of art. They shared their ideas and developed these critiques to help them become the best artists they could be. Your attendance artist today, Robert Delaney. Robert Delaney. I'm going to leave that there just for a second. You can write that down. Robert Delaney. And he was an artist who used these spaces. He's an abstract artist, almost sort of like a surrealist in some ways. But he creates these objects that use positive space and lots of negative space. We see where these dark objects are. This person becomes this positive space. This person, though, becomes a negative space. So understanding the how these spaces are created and used, how artists use them. First is this foreground. We see the subject is standing here closest to us, the young man, and so these trees, sort of on the same area where he is, these are in our foreground. These are the things that are closest to us. In the middle ground are sort of the things that are between us, between the things that are closest to us, and between those things that are furthest away, like that big field of yellow flowers. So those trees sort of there in the middle would be in the middle ground. And in the far background would be the things that are furthest away from us in space, like these flowers or the sky way off in the distance. So, as we look at this work of art, let's see if we can identify what the foreground, the middle ground, and the background is. Well, the foreground is going to be these horses right here, these ones that are closest to us, the ones that if we were in this space, we could walk right over and touch because they're pretty close to us. In the middle ground, we see what's ever going on here. Now, this might be another field of horses, or this might be representation of whatever type of little city is kind of going on between these riders and these distant mountains. But that's sort of the middle ground. And then the background is going to be that sky and those mountains way off in the distance. That's going to be your four middle ground. So we'll take a look and see if they agree with this. Sure, they're saying all that is your foreground. Of course, this is your middle ground, and that background is going to be those mountains and that sky way off in the distance. So bringing it together, understanding, and this is what we're going to talk about on our make day, is how you create these lines, these perspective lines that help a person understand that what you're drawing goes back into space. So Delaney used perspective in his works of art, and he used straight on perspective, what we call that single point perspective. Eiffel Tower here is the focal point in this one, and you can see that there's a horizon line, and all the little lines that go to these buildings would all converge and meet back at a vanishing point line on that horizon. So help to spot the horizon line. That's the hard part sometimes. So what we can do is follow lines that look like they kind of run parallel to each other, like these rows here and these rows here, where they converge. Well, that's going to be most likely where that vanishing point is going to be, and that vanishing point is always going to be on our horizon line. So looking at abstracting to from abstraction to reality, and looking at how you can use the perspective, create that space differently. And again, we're looking at Delaney's work over the time, as we can kind of go through his work and see how it changed. But we see this one has this sort of realism going on in it, where we see these very detailed. We talked about the aerial perspective because in the background we see these muted colors. That's sort of how he's creating that space in this one. This is his foreground space. Kind of middle ground is his houses back here, and then his background is that cloud shape kind of in the background. If we look at his space, his in the mid 20s, how he used space, we see again there's a foreground. That big Eiffel Tower shape is kind of the foreground. There's sort of a middle ground, if you will, might be these tiles here, and then possibly a background that shows sort of what goes on behind there. But we're looking mostly at how he uses those bright colors. And then in the 1930s, we see his work changed yet again, and we see it's more of abstracted even. It's more about shapes itself. Now, all these are making use of that Eiffel Tower as a subject matter, but we're looking at how he addressed it differently in each of those. So, getting the unrecognizable art, we'll go from something called representational or abstracted art to something called non objective art. And an abstract art might be something where we can recognize something that's going on. Like if we paint pears and they're bright um, orange instead of green. Or here we see this is a woman and we can see that that is a person. So, this is an abstract work. This, however, is more non objective because we can't really see any objects. We can't see people or animals or cars or anything we could recognize as an identifiable object. All right, we're going to talk real quick about your make day and look at how you can use things like proportion and space to create those that idea of something going back into space. Here they're using abstracted proportions where the proportions are really kind of different than they should be, and it creates this kind of weird kind of feeling that's going on in that work of art. Here they're talking about comparing the horse here to the size of the trees to the city here. That's how you can identify the depth as it goes back into space. And now we're going to talk about, we're going to make a single point perspective work of art, but then you're going to abstract it. You're going to make it something different. You're going to abstract your work in some way. And so, some of the ways you can do that is to abstract the color. We see their jerseys were red, yellow, and blue, and now the artist has really abstracted and changed what those jerseys might look like. The sky is not all one solid color. They've abstracted it by using these shapes, these geometric squares and rectangles and circles here as the sun. Again, they've broken down what we call fracturing. They've fractured these different planes or spaces into different little areas and are abstracting the color in those spaces. Those are all things you can do to abstract your work of art as well. Let's see, I think there was another button I wanted to click there. Nope. All right, just making sure. So studio time. All right, what we've learned in this lesson, we're going to apply our work of art. We're going to create something that doesn't necessarily have to look like this, but we're going to use the aspects of perspective that he's created, as well as some abstraction. How you can abstract your work, make it change, and maybe change that perspective a little bit, or add color differently than it really exists. And so we're going to have a pretty fun make day. I look forward to seeing you guys on the make day. Don't forget our attendance question answer is, let's go back to his. Ah, no, that's not what I meant to do. I clicked the wrong button. I do that all the time. Let's find his slide. There he is, Robert Delaney. Robert Delaney is your attendance question answer of the day. Guys, have a great afternoon.